The views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the California Secretary of State's office.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of This is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. My name is Cameron Petrovich, and I'm an elections analyst and outreach coordinator with the California Secretary of State's Office Elections Division. And I'm here with my co-host, Kalika.
Hello, everyone. I am Kalika Edwards, and I am also an elections analyst and outreach coordinator with the California Secretary of State. In this episode, we are talking about the personal side of voting, why we show up, what it means when we don't, and how those choices really shape our lives and the communities we care about. There's a lot of noise out there, misinformation, rumors, and stuff that simply isn't true. So we are sharing some easy tips to help you spot what's real, what's not, and how to make informed choices about the things that matter most to you.
Promote the Vote California is an initiative created by the Secretary of State to promote a thriving business community that values civic engagement. We aim to foster partnerships, empower communities, and amplify voices to create a strong and inclusive California. We believe in the power of collaboration to achieve sustainable and meaningful progress. This season, we're dissecting the connection and celebration of the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. 2025 is the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which outlawed discriminatory voting practices and made a lot more people eligible to exercise their voting rights. While the groups who primarily benefited from the Voting Rights Act had easier access to the polls, there remained extra legal barriers keeping folks from voting, and we want to educate our fellow Californians on the issues keeping people away from the polls today and promote the practice of voting in all elections so everyone has a say in their community.
We have an amazing lineup of guests for this episode, and trust us, you are going to want to hear what they have to say. Joining us, we have Clarissa Laguardia, the Executive Director for the California Center for Civic Participation, Ivette Chaidez Villarreal, Civic Engagement Program Director for Valley Voices, and last but not least, our very own Justin Hirai, Election Security Unit Manager here at the California Secretary of State. We hope you enjoy the conversation, so let's get it started, guys. Hey Cameron, have I ever told you I love to track a package for all that online shopping I shouldn't be doing? Word on the street is you can track your vote by mail ballot too.
This time, the streets are correct. By signing up for Where's My Ballot, you can track your ballot and sign up for call, text, or email alerts, just like all those packages you shouldn't be receiving. Visit where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov to sign up today. All right, let's go ahead and kick off this interview. I think a good place to start is to have all of our wonderful panelists introduce themselves and just give a brief introduction to what they do. So we'll start with Ivette. How about you go ahead and give us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Cameron. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ivette Chaidez Villarreal. I am the Civic Engagement Program Director at Valley Voices. So I'm in charge of educating my community about the A through Z of elections, voting, and actually empowering them to speak up in our communities to affect change.
That's amazing. Clarissa, how about you?
Hi, Cameron. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Clarissa Laguardia, pronounced she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Center for Civic Participation. And we're in the business of activating, educating, and mobilizing youth to shape their own future.
We're so glad that we have you here today. Justin, how about you?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Justin Hirai. I'm Election Security Manager here at the California Secretary of State. My second role being the Election Security Manager is I have the pleasure of overseeing a couple of accessibility committees that we have here with our department, which is the Language Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee. But thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get into our first segment.
All right, guys. So we're going to start with when we vote and when we fail to show up. So usually when we talk about voting, we talk about it in a positive light. We encourage people to show up, get involved, make their voices heard. But I think it's also important to explore the flip side of what happens when we don't show up to vote and what impact they may possibly have on our communities. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back over to my co-host Cameron, and he's going to kick off the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Kalika. So, Clarissa, going off of what Kalika just said about looking into kind of the opposite of what the normal message about voting is, of what happens when we don't show up, what do you think are some of the impacts a person or even a community might experience when we choose not to show up at the polls?
I think I want to start off with saying that I know that the narrative is saying that young people don't care, but I think that what happens is that they don't feel like they are represented. And it's like this bad cycle. They don't feel represented, but that happens when they don't show up to vote. 1 in 5 young person that between the ages of 18 and 24, only 1 in 5 shows up for the elections. They're like disproportionately underrepresented in elections. So what happens when you don't show up to vote is that not only is your voice not heard, but somebody else gets to decide for you. So that is school boards, who gets paid, who paid, who controls power, and it's just a vast array of things. Even like what happens in your community park, all that is determined by you showing up to vote and in the local elections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the cycle of not showing up and then feeling underrepresented is definitely a vicious one. Ivette, going off of what Clarissa said, I think it is important to sort of not normalize, but destigmatize the idea of not showing up to vote because it happens. It's not always on purpose and it's not always, accidental. There's just certain circumstances that pop up. So, Ivette, has there ever been a time that you didn't show up for an election, be it statewide or local? And if so, was it intentional? What happened and how did you feel?
Well, I personally have only been able to vote since 2022. But I have had my husband and his mom, two people that, I have information about in my everyday life. They have missed some election cycles simply because before my county became a Voters' Choice Act county, they were unaware of where their precinct was. They didn't know where they were supposed to go and vote. And it made it very difficult. First of all, they didn't know. And secondly, they didn't have the time to vote or the knowledge that their employer actually is supposed to give them time off to go vote. And so I think that also it's really important, like you said, to destigmatize because nobody wants to be painted in a light of like they don't care. Sometimes it just so happens that people aren't informed, which is where we come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that growing up, my parents personally did not show up to the polls a lot, and it used to frustrate me. But as I grew up, I kind of learned that, they also weren't equipped with the type of information that they needed to be informed and vote. And I know that during my first election that I was available to vote in, I actually missed the mail deadline for the primary because I did not have the right information at my disposal to make sure that I got my primary ballot in the mail. And so, of course, it was a little embarrassing, but I was 18 when that election was taking place. And so, just making the commitment to showing up next time.
Absolutely.
Can I add
And
something?
awesome. Yes, please.
Yes. I just wanted to say that, so I'm an immigrant, so I didn't know myself like how anything worked. And I think that I've been guilty of missing special elections, the midterms, before I knew that there were other elections besides the general, the big presidential one. And I think that it just goes back to show that many of us, are not like very familiarized with the systems. And therefore, we are unable to participate because we don't have the information. So we need those trusted messengers to get the word out.
Absolutely. I missed an election myself because I moved and I didn't know anything about provisional voting. So, and didn't know I could go to the precinct across the street from my house and vote provisionally. So information sharing is such a major piece in getting out the vote. And I know that sort of is a perfect segue into our next segment. The impact of being informed and misinformed. So, today's world, we have a nonstop news cycle, social media. We're constantly surrounded by information. Some of it's helpful, some of it's confusing, and some of it's just not true. So, all of it, as you guys have just shared, has an impact on how we engage as voters. So, Clarissa, has anyone ever attempted, either successfully or not successfully, to give you false information to discourage you from showing up to the polls? And if that has happened to you or even someone in your community, what impact did that have on you? How did that make you feel?
I think it hasn't happened to me directly, but it has happened to people close to me where I guess they see me as somebody that they can check in with. So they've asked me, hey, what about this or that? And it's so widespread. I think that's the part that's really shocking to me, just how widespread, especially during elections, the misinformation is, and how easy it is to believe it because it looks so credible. It looks like any other piece of information. And so what I've fallen in the habit of doing is before resharing something on social media, because artificial intelligence, AI, man, it's getting so good. So now I'm like, I can't tell, but you got to do some homework before resharing information, like checking the source and making sure. So what I do is like familiarizing myself with trusted, sources, who has the information that I can rely on, or any fact checking sites, and do that before I take something as truth. And even like nowadays when like the news media, I think that they're struggling as well with the misinformation. And I think that it just makes you very you get to a place of fear that, what can I believe in? And overall, there's so many bad things happening in the news. So try to balance it with some of the good things that are happening. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're lucky because we have a subject matter expert here, Mr. Justin, to help us give us some tips on how to navigate that. Because I know my cousin is constantly telling me, "I think that's AI that you're sharing." I'm like, "Oh my god!" So, I even myself working in elections, I'm afraid to share things. So, Justin, what are some of the most common ways misinformation is spread when it comes to voting?
Thanks, Kalika. I think I kind of want to start on the actual term misinformation because the term misinformation might be misinformation itself. We kind of break it down here into three separate categories. So misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. To loosely define those three, like misinformation is false, but it's not necessarily intended to cause any harm. It's just they're wrong and they don't know that they're incorrect. Where disinformation is kind of the opposite. It's deliberately false. It's created to potentially mislead, harm, manipulate, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's malinformation. So malinformation is a little bit different. It's based on fact. However, that factual information is used out of context to, again, mislead, harm, and manipulate. And I was trying to explain this to some of my family members in the past on the three types of information. And as elementary as I can put it, if you could imagine, let's all get back into our young kids phase, close our eyes for a second, where we have, let's say we have a table and there's three individuals. So like a misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and they are all served, let's just say, the same slice of pizza, for example, same slice of pepperoni pizza. So a misinformation may say, hey, I think my slice is a little bit smaller than the other two. While that's not necessarily true, they believe it's so. Whereas a disinformation person may say, my pizza's the best. I have sausage, bell peppers, mushrooms, pineapple, it's a combo pizza. Um, while this, we know that's untrue because we're all served the same slice, they purposely peddle this information in that way. And where malinformation comes in, again, a little caveat, they may say something along the lines of, did you know that this pepperoni is actually not here? It's not true, or it has mind-altering properties. They want you to eat it so they can control you. So again, it's kind of based on truth being the pepperoni. However, it's used out of context to help mislead the viewer. But the spread of this information is a little bit tricky. So as we all know, digital media is the biggest way we consume media nowadays. You can ask somebody when's the last time they purchased a newspaper, or if they still subscribe to like a magazine. It just dominates the way we consume media, and I believe social media is one of the biggest players in that space. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, Reddit, just consume hours of our daily lives without us really even knowing at it. Is everybody, I don't know if anybody has iPhones, but it can tell you how long you spend on certain social media apps, and it's always a little alarming at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But
It makes me,
yeah.
I'm always like, how long was I
Oh,
on there?
I know. Sometimes it's quite alarming, and I'm not proud of it. But I think a troubling factor in the sense of social media is that anyone can say anything at any time. And you may say, Justin, it's like, why is that such a bad thing? On the surface, it's really not. We encourage free speech and expression, but it's when bad information gets spread is like the troubling factor that kind of keeps me up at night. I mean, we have so many influential people in this world, and each spoken word, each written text just holds a tremendous amount of weight to their followers. And the trend seems that the more people share and reshare the bad information, it almost becomes fact in some people's eyes because it's the more popular opinion.
Mhm.
So and then I think and the touchman on AI, yes. I mean, in our office, we're noticing how much more sophisticated deepfake videos are. The voice
Mhm.
cloning techniques have just gone through the roof. And again, it's really hard to differentiate between fact and fiction. I'm sure we're all aware of the New Hampshire robocalls, or excuse me, the robocalls in New Hampshire that impersonated President Biden during the 2024 primary. I mean, it's just a prime example of how far
Mhm.
technology has advanced. Um, but thankfully, well, within our section, we monitor again for these social media platforms to identify trends of misdis and malinformation and other potential threats. Like if we see that the bad actor or bad information is gaining traction, I think our office does a great job in pushing out factual information to kind of proactively dispel any rumors before they get out of control. But in all, I really think it's imperative as consumers of content to be aware of the content we're viewing and looking through it
Absolutely.
from different angles instead of just blindly adding fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. Yvette, have you been hearing any feedback in the communities in Kings County and Fresno? And I know you guys also cover Bakersfield about mis and disinformation that may be being shared via social media online.
One of the things that came to mind as Justin was sharing was in our county during the last election cycle, we saw such a big turnout of people voting in person because somebody told them that all of our voting machines were hackable and that they needed to vote on the day of, not before. And then actually after the election during the ballot carrying process, um, folks were being told that that wasn't a real thing, that ballot harvesting what is what they were calling it, was
Oh, wow.
illegal, and that they shouldn't trust the people coming to their door to try to cure their ballot. And so then we had to work even harder to let people know, hey, if it's okay, I totally respect the fact that you have questions and that you're not just blindly trusting me. Please call the elections department and talk to the staff there, the registrar, whoever would make you feel more confident. And you don't have to sign anything for me. Just go ahead and talk to them and make sure that your vote is counted, because otherwise you made the effort and they're not even going to count your ballot. That was one of the biggest things that we saw this last election cycle. And actually, we're still getting community members weekly during our outreach, um, talking about how votes weren't counted, or their vote was changed by the machine if they did in fact use one of the voting machines and not a paper ballot. And it's been a little rough, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and I know our team, the outreach team at Secretary of State, and along with in partnership with the election security team, we try and do our best to get as much information out there as we possibly can about the process. And you said something that is really great, that you referred those community members back to their county elections office and back to us, because we want people to come to us with those questions so we can make sure that they feel that the process is transparent, and that we can answer some of those questions. So that is a really great thing. I know I'm speaking for Justin, but we want to make sure that we're getting the correct information out there. And that leads me to our final segment, which is kind of my favorite segment. It's about community. Um, just as we've discussed, there's so much coming at us all the time. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but I think a lot about the role of community, not just the communities that we belong to individually, but the ones that we help build with our voice. And so, how we show up for those communities and for each other to cut through the noise and figure out what's real, what's not real, is such an important conversation for us to have. So, with that being said, I'm going to kind of transition things back over to Cameron, and he is going to lead a conversation about how some tips that we can share with each other about how we can counteract misinformation that shows up in our communities and how we can better advocate for our communities. Cameron?
Thanks, Kalika. Yeah, I think it's important because we've talked about kind of all these issues, in this civic chat where we've talked about, what happens when we don't show up and how mis and disinformation can spread. And I think it's important to kind of walk away with some hope and some optimism and some possible solutions to keep fostering that community, like Kalika said. So, Justin, how can we foster an environment that counters misinformation when it's being spread within our communities, whether that be work, personal community, any kind of community that someone might be involved in?
Yeah, I think the very first safeguard, I mean, it's plain and simple. It's us. We're the first safeguards. It's the viewer. It's the consumer of the media, the information. I know we're, like Kalika mentioned, we're inundated with just tons of information throughout our daily lives, and it is difficult to separate fact and fiction nowadays. I think it's also super important that we take into consideration where we're getting this information from, first and foremost. So, like taking it back to social media, for example, I mean, these apps are designed to keep you on your platform for as long as possible, to keep showing us what we want to see, the algorithm, air quotes. Like, for example, I love dogs. And when I open up Instagram, it's dog pictures. I mean, my dog's sleeping right next to me here. So, but I mean, it's true, the more you continue to interact, like share and promote accounts that could potentially push false narratives and bad actors, the more interactions they get, the more popular it becomes and the more type of um, viewers will see this content. So to help kind of sift through all that information that we're receiving every day, we kind of push what we call the pause method. So pause is an acronym. P being pay attention. So be wary of any sources that use, overly emotional language, suggest your vote doesn't matter, anything to disenfranchise a voter. Pay attention to what kind of messaging is being put out there. We always want to pose the challenge of asking questions. What is the source? Is it reliable? And being on this illustrious panel, I'm sure we're all elections sources of information in our communities, organizations, and families. So it's always super important where that reliable information is coming from. I think it's also important to understand motives. Sources may be pushing their own thoughts, ideas, agendas onto the viewer. And then we encourage folks to send information. We actually have a CA trusted information inbox that we request. If you see mis and dis malinformation out there in the world, feel free to pass it our way and we can investigate it. And hopefully we can squash things before, again, they get too widely spread. Um, and then just relying on experts at the end of the day. We're all experts here. We're all elections officials. And it's really important that we are the staples in our communities, our organizations and families to help push forward positive information, factual information, and when we may not know the answers, pointing individuals to accurate sources. So I know our office has a 800 line that we have a voter hotline that can address any questions in multiple languages we have available. And I think we touched on also, again, reaching out to your local county elections office for any type of information. We have all those contacts on our website as well in case anybody ever needs to get in touch. But I really think it's at the end of the day, um, information should be evaluated by us first, first and foremost. Everybody should be the first roadblock before pushing out any sort of false narratives out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I am guilty of, inadvertently spreading misinformation. And I think, owning up to it and making sure that that misinformation stops with you is super important. Making sure that you take that misinformation down from your own personal pages and making sure that you're sharing accurate information. But I know that a lot of people don't always know, specifically with the ending of the pause method, the experts. I know that a lot of people don't know where to go. So, Ivette, how can we as a community foster an environment that helps folks prioritize voting in all types of elections? Kind of using that pause method, but how can we get those resources and how can we help folks foster that environment so that they feel comfortable and enthusiastic about going to the polls?
That's a really good question. The approach that we've taken on our team when out in the community is not to be scared to have those conversations with the people that we're interacting with. Um, Through our existence, since we're a baby organization, we've become trusted messengers because we treat people with respect and we offer our wraparound services. So people come to us with their questions. They see things online and they're like, hey, what do you know about this? And sometimes I'll know the answer right off the bat, but I'm also not scared to tell people, you know what? This is the first time I'm hearing of this. Let me contact um, the county elections official. Let me see what I can do, who I can connect with, even if it has to be the Secretary of State's office. I don't know. It's okay to admit you don't know, but tell them, let me follow up with you. And then actually follow through and let that person know, like, hey, this is what I found, because then they'll turn around and then they will post and say like, hey, this is not true, and word gets around fast. But also depending on who it is really that you're targeting in the community, at your organization, we leverage our culture a lot. And in the Latino culture, elders are respected and venerated, right? So we really like to identify the señoras, right? The older women who are in their communities, in our communities, seen as trusted messengers. They already like to chat. They have these groups that they attend. So making sure that you're identifying those key community leaders who are already spreading information and making sure that they have the accurate information, the facts. And so then they can, using that same model, spread the good information, and be able to kind of retract anything that they might have said, and alleviate misinformation that happened.
Yeah,
I don't know if it captures it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually a really good kind of full circle moment because we talked at the beginning of this chat specifically about how youth voters might feel disenfranchised or underrepresented. And I know that with what you were saying about in the Latino and Latina culture, elders being very respected, I know that in my experience, a lot of people who are older in age who didn't have the privilege of growing up with technology, like Justin said, have trouble navigating it and don't understand it as well as someone like my age would, someone who's, born, close to the 21st century or in the 21st century. And so I think, kind of, linking those two generations together, one where the younger generation can maybe, show and like you said, admit, hey, I don't know the answer to this, but let me show you how to Google it because I want to know the answer to it, or let me show you how to look this up in the law, or let me show you a resource where we can learn about this together. And then having, the elders and the more respected people in the cultures and communities be able to say, hey, look it, I learned this, and now I know that I was wrong, and owning up to it and being kind of a model.
And Clarissa, I want to piggyback on that as well, because I know you work with a lot of young people, and we are, as an office, focused on pre-registering 16 and 17-year-olds. And I also love with Ivette what you said about the elders, and same in the Black community. We have the aunties that are there helping, being stewards for us younger folks. But getting back to connecting with the younger voters, and how are you fostering that environment of community and helping to combat mis and disinformation?
I think that the way is the framing is so important. So we are trying to frame that this piece of the democracy matrix, voting is just one step out of many, and we define civic participation as anything that you do to improve your community. Something that really resonates with young people is collective liberation. So when you vote, it's not a vote just for you, it's a vote for everybody in your community, for your family, for your elders. And also we're trying to make it so that we think of young people as a whole human person, not just somebody that's going to go and vote. So I think that when we honor that, and they're involved at every level of what we're doing, whether they're like a youth board member or like doing our programs, we create a feedback loop where they're always constantly assessing and giving us feedback on our programs. But our goal is to normalize talking about civics in every aspect of life. And I think something that's proven very successful for us right now is that when we have program, like, for example, a fellow, they organize an event in our community about something that they care about. And so they bring, I think that civics and voting is just embedded into everything that we do. And that is the way to connect with youth when it comes from other youth. So I've surrounded myself with Gen Zers, and so they are helping with our social media. They are my employees. There are like, in the programs that we're running. So we're building a culture where they're seen, their full self is seen and heard and validated. And they themselves, they are the trusted messengers. They are the peer and mentors to the other youth that are in different points in the civic spectrum.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I know that that's an area that we try and focus on here at the Secretary of State. So I wanted to make sure that we spoke to the young folks. So I want to just personally thank you guys for joining us today for this conversation. Your insight was amazing. But I also want to throw it out there, roundtable style. We could start with you, Clarissa, if there's anything else you want to add to the conversation before we let you go. About the work that you do, or that areas in which you would like to see us highlight more as community members trying to advocate for our communities.
Yeah, I just think that, anything that's being done for youth should be done in collaboration with them. We co-work, we co-design, we co-plan for the future with them. And so in order to connect with them and speak their language, they need to be involved, and they can tell when it's been done without them. And this is something me as an elder millennial, I quickly realized in the ways that I engaged, pre-pandemic and like 10 years ago, is different than the way that youth interact today with information. We're very strong, or trying to be really strong in digital organizing. So the information that is shared digitally. And so I think that also something that can be useful for youth is creating a community spaces, even if it's virtual, mixing it. I think hybrid is great. So if you have some virtual and some in-person events throughout the state, partnering with other community-based orgs, like us here on this panel, and kind of amplifying the message that we're sharing and information, and just being partners and collaborating, reducing the amount of duplication of efforts that people are doing with the limited resources that we do have. So thank you for the opportunity.
Very true. Yvette, you have some different areas in which you think we can uplift and highlight for our communities that you want to speak about today?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind, I know that the budget's a little tight this year, but if there is ever any opportunity for you all to advocate for funding for outreach to our county elections departments, I know that would be wonderful. Um, it would really greatly help our community get the information that they so desperately need. But also just piggybacking off of what Clarissa said, no matter what your culture is, leverage it. It helps you connect with your community. For example, one of the things that is my favorite is we host what we call like ballots and burritos or ballots and cafecitos, where it's just chatting with the community. We tell them, hey, bring your questions. We're gonna talk about it. And sometimes we have a theme and we're like, okay, you want to learn about what happens after you turn in your ballot? We're going to talk about it. And making sure that you aren't just like reading off of a document that has a bunch of like legal jargon. That's not going to help you connect. Language access isn't only having a paper with words in Spanish or in Tagalog, right? It's actually like if your community member can read it and comprehend it, that's the goal. So even if there are already materials that are available online from a trusted source like the Secretary of State, sometimes we need to digest that a little more and not recreate the wheel, but just break it down in simpler terms so that it's easier to understand. Because if one person can understand it, then they can also teach it. And that's just a model that I can never not share. Um, it is very confusing, especially when you're looking at a ballot and there's measures and propositions on it. Create things that help you connect with your community. For example, we don't really have a youth program yet in our organization. We're working on it. We're trying to identify somebody that's youth and that really has a strong interest so that we can develop one. But one of our staff did create a comic book, very short, about how a community member was able to bring a skate park to their town. They started with not knowing anything about how to get that done. Then they went to city council meetings, they knocked on doors, and then the end was a happy ending, right? But we just create those materials in collaboration with some of our youth staff. And it was a hit. So just find different ways that you can connect. Very long-winded, but it works.
No, I mean, that is what you said. You hit the nail on the head, like trying to find different ways to connect to communities and sort of speaking in a voice that can resonate with them is very important. I'm going to let you have the last word, Mr. Justin, because I know you love to hear your voice.
Thanks, Galika. First and foremost, just wanted to appreciate the opportunity to come on this panel and meet you, Yvette, Clarissa. I think you guys are doing wonderful things in your communities. One thing I just wanted to highlight as a closing statement is, something I touched on. Part of my role here at the Secretary of State is I oversee the language accessibility and voting accessibility advisory committees. Those groups, I think, also help create a space where people can voice their concerns, whether it's language concerns, whether it's accessibility concerns, and we help organize this group. And it's great to hear firsthand voices on some of the troubling things that we see in the community. Being from the state perspective, unfortunately, we're not necessarily boots on the ground, but we get that perspective from our groups. Just wanted to let everybody know at the end here, the final quarter four of 2025, we will be releasing applications for anybody that wants to participate in these committees. It will be for the language and accessibility advisory committees. So be on the lookout for that. Those announcements will come. I'm sure we'll post that on all of our social medias and send it out to the counties. If you don't have to be a member to attend our meetings are open to the public, and they can be found on our elections page under the committees and task force. We have a couple meetings coming up in August, which is the next time we'll meet, and then we'll meet one more time before the close of 2025, and then we will get a whole new round of applicants. So be on the lookout for the application template if you are interested, and feel free to reach out and we can direct you to where it's at.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you guys again for being such great partners with Promote the Vote and with the Secretary of State's office, and agreeing to do this podcast. Cameron and I really, really appreciate it. And we're very excited to share this conversation out there for those listeners. And thank you again. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, that was such a great discussion between Justin, Clarissa, Ivette, and us, Kalika. I think I learned a lot. There was some great perspectives. I really appreciated how Clarissa highlighted specifically in segment one how some people really kind of only pay attention to the big federal, like presidential elections, and maybe might not have the knowledge and be equipped with the resources to know about local elections, like special elections. And I think that's something super important to touch on.
I agree. I thought the conversation was really great. I hope there was a lot of valuable insights that everybody can take from the conversation. I, of course, love to talk about community building. And so listening to Ivette talking about how we can leverage some of in the Black community, we call them the elders, to help push forward voting information. And I also really liked the perspective that Clarissa gave about the youth vote and not looking at that vote as a monolith or just assuming that they're not going to show up, but really creating, and I'm about to say a common phrase online, creating the space to let their voices be heard, whatever that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was super important. She said something, and I don't have the quote on me, but she said something about we can't look at the youth as purely just a vote to be had. And I think that's super important. It goes hand in hand with the apathy that was mentioned at the beginning of the episode, at the beginning of the interview. And it kind of leads into that kind of never-ending cycle of feeling underrepresented and then not voting, and then feeling underrepresented because you didn't vote, and just on and on and on. And so I think, engaging, youth voters and saying, hey, it's important to vote because you get a say, because you should have a say, because you are a person who, lives in our democratic society. I think that's really, really important. And I also think it was really, really important how Justin differentiated between dis, mis, and malinformation. Because disinformation, while it is intentional, misinformation itself is not always intentional, and it's not always done with the knowledge that it is misinformation. And I think kind of destigmatizing the idea of accidentally sharing it and taking the steps that we talked about in segment 3 to build that community and foster it and kind of combat that is really important.
Yes, I really liked his example because I thought that broke it down with the pizza. I thought him being there to provide that sort of inside baseball perspective and also sharing things that people can do. You can always reach out. You can email that CA trusted information at sos.ca.gov email box if you're seeing some misinformation that's prevalent. I also like how Yvette was able to tie that together with her community, talking about the confusion around ballot curing and voting in person, and how rumors are spreading within communities about that. And I think they both Clarissa and Yvette, were able to share with us some insights about where maybe we need to make sure we're expanding the conversation and our outreach about certain areas. And I love how Justin was able to provide some perspective on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it shows how, simple dis, or malinformation and, the lack of resources for people to kind of combat that turns from an individual, being afflicted by a, mis or disinformation campaign and turns it into a community problem, right? Because now, as it was mentioned, the whole, county or several people from the county showed up to vote in person, because it was being, spread throughout the county that, you could only vote in person, which was not true. And so it becomes, a community issue there. It becomes a community issue for the election officials who now have to kind of rectify that situation and deal with the ballot curing process. And so the problem goes from an individual to a community problem, but it's also solved the same way, right? It's solved by the community reaching back out to the individual and kind of stopping it in its tracks. So I think that's my biggest takeaway from this episode, is that it can spread to be a community problem, but it can also be solved the same way.
Yes, and I think they both were able to connect those through lines through through the conversation. And I know I don't know how about you, I feel uplifted and like ready to get out there in the streets and do more outreach to talk about some of these issues in communities, especially under the Promote the Vote umbrella. And I know I feel fired up and empowered. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to keep Justin's pause method in mind as I go forward, and Yvette and Clarissa's perspective from a community-based approach. So kind of combining those two, and we'll keep Promote the Vote going.
Yes, yes, yes. So, everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed the conversation that we were able to have, and we will be back.
Looking for ways to take action beyond just listening? Head over to promotethevote.ca.sos.ca.gov, your one-stop shop for getting involved and making an impact in your community.
Let's be real, voting can feel like a lot. Whether you're registering to vote for the first time or planning a community pop-up, Promote the Vote California keeps it simple.
It's built for everyday people who want to make a difference. No politics, just participation.
Yep, that's promotethevote.ca.sos.ca.gov. Save the link, spread the word, and show up for your community.
This is Promote the Vote California, the podcast. It's brought to you by the California Secretary of State's office. It's hosted by Kalika Edwards and me, Cameron Petrovich, analysts and outreach coordinators for the Elections Division at the California Secretary of State's office.
Cameron and I want to thank you for joining us for another season of our little podcast. We are so grateful to our incredible guests this season: Kim Alexander, Maria Salinas, Clarissa Laguardia, Yvette Chaidez Villarreal, Justin Hirai, and all of the panelists participating in the live recorded event celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, for sharing their insights, stories, and passion for building a stronger, more connected California.
Before we go, first, I'd like to thank you, Kalika, and our listeners for having me on this season as a new host. It's been an honor. I think this season, we've very much achieved our goal that we set out to do: to explore the intersection of civic engagement in everyday spaces, to explore and dissect how these spaces often see mutually beneficial relationships when eligible voters are encouraged to get out and vote, and subsequently build a cohesive and strong community where the public works in tandem with all the entities in its communities, whether it be civilians, businesses, advocacy groups, or governmental bodies. I think we also took away some valuable lessons on the cause and effects of dis, and malinformation and how to combat it to promote healthy and enthusiastic civic engagement in California. I hope our listeners took away these same lessons and are going back to their communities with a fresh and revamped outlook on civic engagement and are ready to combat misinformation and encourage their community to become more tightly knit by encouraging everyone to engage in the civic process and do their part by registering to vote and getting out to vote in all elections.
We hope to be back soon with more conversations and fresh insights to help you feel confident and ready to vote. In the meantime, you can learn more about our program at promotethevote.ca.sos.ca.gov and find official election information at vote.sos.ca.gov. Bye for now.